Right, just a very quick update. It's a Sunday, so it's a fairly slow day. Did a bit of reading this morning, looking through some websites, playing around with a new Chrome plugin, which allows you to put kind of post-it notes on websites. I'll maybe do a demo later in the week. It might prove to be useful. We'll give it a go and see how it works out. What else? Not much today. It's been kind of a day off, hasn't it, mate? However, I did tidy up one of the problems from yesterday. Well, I say problems. If you remember yesterday, I was talking about the documentation and doing the YAML auto docs. And when I was running through the show and tell, I was kind of mystified about why I'd suddenly ended up with Sphinx version 6 when I'd had to revert it back to Sphinx version 5 for the YAML. I figured out what the problem was. I'd forgotten I hadn't committed all of the changes that I'd put in for the YAML documentation stuff. I've just done that. So yeah, so it was just an oversight on my part. I've just done that commit. It's fairly trivial. But yeah, because the YAML plugin, sorry, the YAML Autodoc plugin is not currently compatible with Sphinx 6, I had to roll back to Sphinx 5, which for me is not a big deal at the moment because evidently I don't use any features of Sphinx 6. Okay, plan for the week ahead. I'm gonna first thing is I'm gonna update the Gitea project and start the ball rolling on setting that up, and then I'll do a show and tell on how the project differences are at the moment. I'm going to develop two ways forward with this. The first way is to treat the developer VM setup I showed you yesterday as an upstream to an upstream project to your project. Okay, so everything that happens in the developer VM will be able to just do a straightforward pull into any project, and when you run the Vagrant up, it will rebuild again from a base Debian machine all the way up, but it will include all the dev VM stuff and all of the and anything specific to the project. Cool. The second method, do you mind? The second method will be I will put together, again probably next week, a Packer definition, which will build a Vagrant box with whatever. Oh, you're a pain. It will build a Vagrant box with the with whatever version of Vagrant is, for that release, and then your Packer project, when you run the Vagrant file, it will use the base box for a particular version of Vagrant, and then perform any updates. Should make it a lot quicker because it will reduce all the download times, things like that. I think we'll still maintain all of the inputs from the upstream. The difference will be that we'll need a way of controlling the base box, whether it's going to be the Debian base box or the Vagrant base box. And I think I'll do that through an environment variable and default. So you can specify the environment variable as an override to allow you to have your project supply the base box to be used. But we still need to maintain, okay. I will still maintain the idea though of doing the pull from the upstream so that you can update the salt setup, because when you run the high state, anything from the upstream will then get updated. even if the base box specified has already got, in theory, the basic development environment in it. Which kind of gives you the best of both worlds. It speeds things up because a lot of the time spent at the moment by asserting the high state is things like, downloading all the packages, downloading Docker and installing it, downloading and installing Concourse. All of that kind of stuff takes a lot of time in compared to the rest of it. So given that in the base developer VM box, all of that stuff would already be there. When you run the high state, for the most part, the high state will just be saying, oh, this is already installed, this is already installed, this is already installed. So it'll be very quick. And it'll only be the project elements which will then slow things down. So the idea is you kind of get the best of both worlds in that circumstance. Alternatively, what you could do is you could completely, ignore all the salt stuff and actually just use the base box, build a project on top of it, using whatever method you like, and you just take the developer VM as a starting point. Doing that, though, you lose a lot of the power of the whole point about having the common salt set up. So, it's probably easier to demonstrate than it is to explain without diagrams. And given this is a quick video, I'm not going to bother. Next week, once I've got the Packer working, and I've got the Gitea project kind of in shape, and working with the two alternative methods, by the end of the week, I'll be able to give you a show and tell to show you how the difference works and why they're set up that way. And we'll go through it a bit more slowly. But hopefully, it won't take too long to get those things set up. I don't want to do the show and tell in the middle of the week. I'll probably save it till the Friday or the Saturday. The rest of the week will be showing you how to write a salt formula. And what we're going to do is we're going to discuss the ins and outs of the way we will develop our Gitea delivery. And as I've said before in other ones of these updates, it's an interesting exercise because of the fact that Gitea requires Git as the Go application of Gitea itself, which is basically the web server element, and has a database running on the back end, Postgres database running on the back end. But this lends itself to some interesting discussions about the way we deploy these things and how we keep everything working together. Not to mention the fact that we then have to consider things like how we do backups, how we restore from backups. It's actually a little microcosm of a lot of the issues you come across when you're doing DevOps in the wild, as it were. For example, Gitea stores its data in several places, but it stores, like Git will store your Git objects in its own repositories, but it also stores data in Postgres. And in order for everything to work, the different sources of data need to agree. So your backup needs to be done so that those things agree. So then you come across the question, well, okay, how can I do that? The normal way of doing it, if you're working informally, is you can just say, well, okay, Gitea, we'll turn Gitea off effectively so that nobody can do anything with it. And then we can do a cold backup, knowing that nobody's going to be partway through a transaction during our backup. That may not be acceptable. So, you might want to work out a way of doing a warm or a hot backup so that, people can still be using the system while you're doing a backup. I mean, an obvious way to do that is to say, well, okay, we'll make it read-only. So you can pull and read information from the database, but you can't actually do any updates. Another way might be to actually take like file system snapshots, which are generally quicker. and then maybe do your backup from the snapshots or something like that. I don't know. These are all things to be thought about, though, ahead of time if you want to do this. Similarly, with restoring it, when you do the restore, what you're going to do is install a base file system and then restore the database, the Git repositories, and any other static data. So, yeah, so those are all things you need to think about kind of ahead of time when you're looking at how you're going to structure these things. And that in turn plays into, well, okay, how do we set Salt up to help us to do these things? Because these are the sort of things that, you know, it's sort of bread and butter. It's, you want Salt states to do these various operations, but you don't necessarily want them to be, you want them to be available, but not necessarily stuff that you're going to kick off straight away. They're just there in your configuration, ready to be used. So yeah, so we can talk about that. We can talk about the way formulae are essentially packaged and the way they're deployed, and the different ways of doing that. So there's a lot of kind of key detail that we can get into. We can also talk about, for example, whether or not there's an advantage to running these things in a containerized environment, or whether if you run them just in pure VM. What are the pros and cons of doing those different things? How would you go about, for example, fronting Gitea? Yeah, sure, it's a web server in its own right, and in the trivial sense, we can just access it just by accessing whatever port Gitea is sitting on. But yeah, again, even in an internal corporate environment, you're more likely to have it referred to just by name. Users shouldn't have to worry about, you know, what port number to put in. They'll just go, oh, I just want the Gitea repository. So we'll probably need to front it with something like Nginx in order that we can remove some of the complexity. What about SSL termination if we want to make it accessible by HTTPS? Where do we deal with that? Where do we deal with the certificates? How do we manage certificates? You can see that even a very simple thing like Gitea throws up a lot of decisions. Now, if you're doing this in your home lab, most of this you don't care about, because you can muddle together whatever you feel like. If you're doing it in a professional capacity, then these are serious concerns, and it's part and parcel of the job to be able to figure these things out. Sometimes you'll be told for a particular system how it should be, but as a DevOps, you should be in a position to think these things through for yourself. Not least of which, or reasons, not least of the reasons for being able to reason about these things, is the fact that sometimes you're told to do something and you look at it and you think, well, that's the dumbest piece of crap I've ever seen. And you need to be able to come up with a good rational, argument about why it shouldn't be done a particular way. Sometimes you will be ignored. And only later will the shit hit the fan. That comes down to internal politics of your organization. So yeah. Anyway, all interesting stuff. Right. Another waffly one. I'm off, and I'll see you later in the week.